but I'm just fed up with it. It's so Charger-like. But joining me here up onto the show, he's big on Chargers football, has a podcast, of course, called Locked on Chargers. David Droegemeier, he is joining me. I know, David, I had to get this rant out because, like you and I've been a fan since I was 7 years old. Enough is enough. This is insanity. If I'm hitting the right points, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there was no second half adjustment. It seemed like they reverted back to the same thing that they have been through in the last, 2 years. Joe Lombardi's got to go. Brandon Staley's clearly off his skis. There was no other way of really explaining what we just saw from last night. Am I right?
Yeah, so as far as the first half was concerned, they were pretty dominant. I mean, everything was working. It really didn't seem like there was anything that they didn't do, except for, I think the running numbers were a little bit smoke and mirrors because they were just efficient in the red zone. They didn't really, run the ball well at all the entire game. They ran for under 3 yards a carry, and that's a very stout defensive line that they were going up against. So, I think that was a little bit misleading. As far as Brandon Staley is concerned, I have to disagree with you. I don't think there's any way he's going to get fired. I think that if you look at the history of Chargers head coaches, the last 3 or 4 of them have at least got 4 seasons. And you also have to take into account the amount of injuries that the Chargers have had to deal with this season. Okay. Rashawn Slater got hurt in the 3rd game, missed the entire season. Okay. Joey Bosa missed the majority of the season. Keenan Allen missed 9 games with a hamstring injury. There is a laundry list of different names that I can rattle off that was supposed to make a very intentional difference on how this season was going to run. Now, returning back to the second half of this game, the Chargers also dealing with injuries. One of the best corners that they had on the team, Michael Davis, left with an injury. And then obviously his replacement, Jasir Taylor, who is the 6th round pick, got picked on, pun intended. They really went after him, and the Chargers did not get enough pressure. They really went to the quick game as far as the Jaguars offense is concerned. So you have to give them credit for that. And yeah, they collapsed, and that's what I put it on Twitter. It's just the biggest chargering of all time. It's just something that is impossible to fathom considering how that first half went. But you got to close things out in the NFL. That's the bottom line. You have to put games away. It felt like they had an opportunity to do that in the 3rd quarter, and they couldn't get it done. So, yeah, it's devastating. It's going to be a horrendous offseason, incredibly long and painful, having to look back on the result of this game.
Yeah, and ultimately, because the last thing you want to do, and we've seen this from so many different quarterbacks, you don't want to end up wasting away the talent. Justin Herbert is just too damn good for that. Now, I made this point because I've heard all the heckles. A lot of people still tend to believe that Justin Herbert is overrated. Well, I just looked at the box score. Trevor Lawrence threw 4 picks last night and had to make it up by 4 touchdowns, and his quarterback rating was 70. Yeah. While Justin Herbert on the other side had 1 touchdown, no pick, and his quarterback rating was 84. You're trying to tell me he's overrated? But this is part of the narrative that Justin Herbert, no matter what happens around him, I get it. He'll get the criticism, but it's too harsh of the fact because he's inheriting a mess. So at the end, you got to get the right person to step in.
It's a team game. I can't understand why all of these people just single out the quarterback like they go out there and they play the game by themselves. They don't have receivers. They don't have running backs. They don't have they don't have linemen. They don't have anybody. They're just out there playing against the other quarterback one-on-one. That's such a lazy take. I can't resonate with that because there's so many other factors involved. Justin Herbert did his job. Okay. He protected the football. He made the throws that he needed to make. Throughout this game, he did what he had to do to put the Chargers in position to win. The defense failed him. That is absolutely what happened in the second half of this game. If you get 1, maybe 2 stops in the second half, this game is a win for the Chargers, and we're talking about them moving on and probably taking on the Chiefs, depending on how the rest of Wild Card Weekend works out. So The defense was the biggest problem. And I think that's one thing, you have to look at going into this offseason is, man, are they going to be able to get better quality depth? Or are they going to be able to fix these problems? I mean, this is going to be, if Brandon Staley continues on as head coach, will be the third year in this defensive system, and there will literally be no more excuses as to the play on the field because, yeah, they've been atrocious stopping the run all year. They've been excellent against the pass, but you couldn't step up when it mattered the most, which was the playoffs. And so, yeah, I mean, a very interesting team to cover this year, a very good football team at times, a very puzzling football team at times, but the Chargers have work to do. Obviously, they couldn't finish it and get the job done.
Yeah, and so ultimately, it's right now to the point of, are you going to straighten this out, or should we at the very least find somebody who could really straighten it out in the right way possible? Because I mean, like I said, Justin Herbert deserves a lot more than just what he's getting from the performances of the critical coaching calls.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, I mean, I will say this: I do put Joey Bosa on blast because I know that in playoff football, it's never easy because refs are going to swallow the whistle majority of the time.
He got held relentlessly in that game. It's ridiculous.
Oh, very much. And I know it gets frustrating, but when you lose your cool twice in the middle of that, you now become the liability on the team. And you don't want to feel like that. It is hard. It's very, very hard. I know that those were calls, should have been called. Unfortunately, you got to kind of play through adversity. I mean, that's what's tough about the NFL. You got to be tougher than what the atmosphere around you is. So, I mean, at the end, everybody's got to straighten themselves out. Everybody's got to be the next guy to make the play. Because if you can do that and keep your cool, then it would have changed the narrative. Now, I will say this, because I said this during the time of the trade deadline. I was very surprised, though, that the Chargers couldn't possibly make a small, slight move that would have helped them in the wide receiving core. Because here's the thing, Keenan Allen, he's not getting any younger. And you're going to utilize a lot of his talents, but eventually you're going to want to start looking at something else. You're going to want to get somebody younger in there. I made a point. I thought they should have made a call to the Jets knowing Denzel Mims wants to trade out. I mean, why not? You would have gotten a couple picks out of the way, but you would have got a young receiver, let him learn the system, and maybe he could work his way up because Jalen Guyton was out for the season. Yeah. So it's like at times it's like whether they really want to pull the trigger or they don't. Now, let's hypothetically speak, though, because if they do go with Brandon Staley, you're right. There is no excuses. But come Monday morning, if in fact Staley gets that call, and then would that be time? Because as myself as a Charger fan, this has been ridiculous and enough is enough. Would that be that point that potentially you have got to get Sean Payton in this office? If it's, let's hypothetically speak on that.
Yeah. So if Brandon Staley got that call on Monday saying that he was fired after this season, then yeah, I think that there's no way that you couldn't connect those two together because I think it's obvious that Sean Payton got interviews from the Broncos and got interviews from the Colts and whoever else. But let's be clear. We know he wants to coach in LA. Why wouldn't he? The Chargers have Justin Herbert, who is 24 years old. Mm-hmm. They have Keenan Allen. They have Mike Williams under contract, for multiple years. They have Khalil Mack and Joey Bosa under contract and Derwin James under contract for multiple years. This is a very, very talented roster that could be a coach away. That is very, very easy to deduce. Now, knowing the Chargers organization and knowing that they are kind of cheap, they have that kind of stigma about them. I just don't know if they would be willing to, one, give him the $20 million per season that he's looking for, that he deserves because he is a Super Bowl winning coach, the autonomy to make those type of decisions that he wants to make, giving him kind of front office control, which the Chargers don't really do that. And not only that, but on top of that, have to provide draft compensation to the Saints in order to be able to get his rights. all three of those things are unprecedented things that the Chargers have never done, and it is very difficult for me to see that they would pull that trigger even if they had that vacancy. Now, I will say the one situation that is most likely to occur, in my opinion, covering the team as closely as I do, Joe Lombardi is going to get fired. That's going to happen immediately. And I do think they are going to look for a different, more veteran type of offensive coordinator to pair with Brandon Staley. So maybe you get a little bit of a different experience there. And hey, a guy who got the boot or is looking for other opportunities has the last name of LaFleur. And I understand that the Chargers were looking at him to be an OC beforehand. And I think it's important to remember Joe Lombardi was not Brandon Staley's first pick at offensive coordinator. Okay. This is like his third choice. And that's ended up what happened. Excuse me. So I do think that Joe Lombardi gets fired and a different offensive coordinator gets put into place.
Yeah, because ultimately, I mean, you could see the difference in that offense. I mean, think about it. When they had Anthony Lynn and you had Shane Steichen as an offensive coordinator, at least he got the best of Justin Herbert to where he was breaking records his rookie year. On top of it, the run game seemed at least efficient, but no matter the injuries and such, it seemed like it was building for that plateau. But yeah, you got to have somebody who's willing to end up making that. I mean, hell, we've watched Ben Johnson in Detroit put up massive numbers with Jared Goff, and he's got a really stacked wide receiver core. Now it is interesting because looking at the AFC West and what it's shaped to be, we know Denver's obviously looking for that right head coach. And it's obviously running through Kansas City. And then the Raiders now are looking for a new quarterback. So it's not like that the AFC West could not continuously build their competition around, because I mean, they're just getting better every year. But from an outside perspective looking in, I mean, you got to find ways to beat Kansas City, because I guarantee you, if this narrative did not happen last night, they would have gone in to Kansas City for a third time, and I think they would have changed that narrative after that.
I agree.
It's quite possible, but now you look in next season, would Denver maybe get the right head coach to get Russell Wilson going? Or, you know, the Raiders, would they get Tom Brady, or would they risk going and drafting a quarterback that could fit in this system? I mean, that's a lot to think about around in this division.
Well, for the Raiders, I mean, it's going to be a 1-year stopgap. I mean, if you do bring in Tom Brady, he's 45 years old, and Father Time is undefeated. I don't care who you are, even if you are Tom Brady. And honestly, I think if he loses today, I think he might actually call it a career. And I mean, he should have done it last year if we're being completely honest. And we saw the reverberation of that particular decision and how that kind of affected him and his family. I'm not going to get too far into that because that sucks. But as far as the Broncos is concerned, honestly, I don't think that anyone's going to be able to come in and get the best of Russell Wilson, because I think Russell Wilson is going downhill. I don't think he has much left in the tank. And I don't think his teammates really like him very much. And just from an outsider's perspective, for me, following the Broncos as I've been following the Chargers, it just doesn't seem like Russ is a very authentic individual. It just doesn't seem like he's a real guy, and he is that same way all the time. So it just, and I think that's really hard for teammates and people like that to buy in, because they don't feel like he's being authentic. Right. And then when you're not going out there and performing at a $250 million level, like they paid him, and they traded an amazing amount of assets to acquire him, you were expecting a much, much better performance. And yeah, I mean, he's what, 33, 34. That's not particularly old for a quarterback, but for the type of quarterback that he's been in his career, that is old, because he is somewhat of a running quarterback. And is he going to be able to use that arm to be able to kind of change and really reestablish himself in a different way, playing quarterback a different way, and be successful? That's going to be what I'm going to be watching out for. Now, I will say that ownership group, I mean, hey, that's Walmart. Okay. They got Walmart money. All right. So they got a lot of resources, and they can really throw their money around to get whatever type of coach, whatever type of players that they want within the constraints of that salary cap, of course. But I think if I had to pick, I would say the Broncos are probably someone to be a little bit wary of, more so than the Raiders, because if you don't have a quarterback, then you really don't have any kind of team.
Yeah, and how I would have pointed this out, because I explained this on my show a couple weeks ago, and I said I think the best fits, because of the scenario that the Broncos are in.
Yeah.
I feel like Shane Steichen could be a fit. Frank Reich could possibly be a fit, because even being a quarterback whisperer, I mean, he's got a great pedigree. He's worked with a lot of quarterbacks.
Sure.
So even working with Russ, get him slightly moving, but yet still utilizing the same he had in Seattle, it could work. But I said this, I'm like, if it were me getting draft capital, I would have traded Jerry Jeudy to at the very least get stuff back, because you're getting Tim Patrick back next year. And you got a real good receiving core. You could even draft another one. I mean, that Jackson
Patrick and Sutton are very close to each other. They're very similar type of players, and Jerry Jeudy is explosive. When he gets the ball in his hands, he can really take off. And I don't know if there's another player on that offense that can replicate that type of success. So if I were them, I would keep Jeudy and trade one of their other receivers.
Yeah, and even for the Raiders, because ultimately we all know the tenure from Josh McDaniels in Denver. Has he really learned a whole lot? Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it.
Yeah, and so in the end, like I said this, and even for Raider fans, like, are you sure you're going to go through 20 more quarterbacks to find your franchise quarterback again? Because it just seems like we're just going back to Rich Gannon again.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any types of sense. Now, you could bring in that quarterback and maybe potentially draft one if you could, but at the end, it's just like you're kind of swinging with your hands tied, and that's where they sit at this point. So in the off season, there's a lot to really do for as far as work-wise with it. But how do you perceive that the Chargers in the off season, knowing from what offense and defense had produced, what now seems to be they've got to focus on this point in the football? I know run defense is a big thing that they have to adjust. And I think maybe at some point they got to start kind of setting themselves for like reserving, maybe potentially starting to get some wide receivers in there at some point.
Absolutely. There's no question about it. So when you look at the kind of the off-season schedule, you would say for the Chargers, the one thing you have to consider is, unfortunately, that they're cap strapped. They spent a lot of their money last season. Now, with the new TV deals coming out, I do believe there will be an adjustment to the cap that they'll see a pretty big surplus in that will change. And so there will be some money to kind of spread around, but they're going to have to restructure some contracts, I feel like, but they need to put some money into that defensive line, some more money. They brought in Austin Johnson and Sebastian Joseph Day to shore that up, but unfortunately Austin Johnson got hurt, and Sebastian Joseph Day did admirably, but he was playing basically by himself on that defensive line. And then I'll give a shout out to Braden Fehoko too. I feel like he did a really good job towards the back end of the season to try to provide some of that, run stopping power, if you will. But they need to add a speed wide receiver, which I have been clamoring for since the draft last year. I mean, I like Zion Johnson, don't get me wrong, but for them to go through that entire draft and not even take a swing at a speed receiver was a travesty to me. It was an absolute miss, and something I still don't understand to this day. And I agree with you, at the trade deadline, they could have took another shot, because if you were all in, like your decisions that you made in the offseason indicated that you were, that's a move that you would have made. And it would have been not even a second thought. But that's the number one on my list. But I want to see them get that in the draft. I really do feel like that's the best place to do it, especially with the limited amount of money that they're going to be working with. So on offense, it's you better get a speed receiver. And I honestly wouldn't mind them getting a playmaking tight end as well. I feel like Hunter Henry was a great mix with Justin Herbert that first year, but that didn't really get the chance to materialize because he left and went to the Patriots, and barely getting used over there. I mean, I don't really understand that move from his perspective, and on defense, it's all about shoring up that run defense, because I do like the corners on the outside. I feel like they played extremely well. Hopefully JC Jackson comes back and he's somewhat close to himself because he never really got comfortable in this defense. And I don't know if he was ever really healthy at any point as well. I feel like he was really trying to work his way back through that. But it's all about stopping the run on offense and getting the ball down the field and really utilizing that rocket arm that Justin Herbert possesses. You saw when Jalen Guyton was out there how effective that can be, just stretching the field. It changes the dynamic of the offense, and obviously that's not hard to see. So stop the run on defense, get down the field on offense. That should be part of the game plan for the Chargers going into this offseason.
It's funny because, and I don't know if you noticed it, but I think a lot of us, we were very surprised because even from last year, I mean, you had last year's preseason where Tyron Johnson was just going off. Yeah. And I was very surprised that first they cut him. He goes and signs with different teams. And they didn't inquire about possibly bringing him back on a practice squad contract to work his way to get back into that portion. I mean, that could have honestly helped even with Jalen Guyton out for the season.
From what I heard about the Tyron Johnson situation is that he didn't really pick up the offense at the level that they wanted him to pick it up. They didn't feel like he understood things the way that they were trying to execute it. And that's why they didn't bring him in. And that's why they didn't bring him in at any point after they cut him. So I think that's the major reason why. And for me, I'm like, I don't care if you don't understand the offense. I'm telling you to do one thing. Run as fast as you possibly can down the football field and expect the ball. I don't care if you understand all of the blocking concepts. That's not what I'm bringing you in here for. You're not a blocker. You're a speed demon that I'm trying to weaponize for this offense, like the Chargers did in the past. But I mean, obviously there are a lot more that goes into being an NFL football player than just running down the field. I mean, there are certain expectations and requirements that, they want you to be able to do. And unfortunately, Tyron Johnson was not able to perform those tasks at an adequate level for them.
Yeah, and I mean, even in this league, because of being quarterback centric, it's not like you can never not have enough offensive weapons in this time,
Exactly.
And the way that it's been shifting. But, hopefully by the end of the night, I mean, I know it's obviously going to be a big time recovery for a lot of Charger fans and for a lot of the Chargers fan base. Yeah. But, work's got to get done. That's ultimately what has to be put in place. And you've got to hope that everything matches the way that it should, because again, Kansas City, we all know that we're tired of hearing a lot of their hecklers. We know that, the competition with Joe Burrow and Josh Allen and a lot of these guys, it's only getting bigger and better from here. I mean, we're going to be watching some of these games and you're going to see of those three that know that in the AFC, there's a lot that you got to kind of run past in order to be the best of the best. Yeah. So hopefully they talk some sense in themselves and maybe they can get themselves back into where they want to be. But I appreciate it, David. It's so good talking, man. And especially with a lot of, I had to find at least a lot of people that knowledgeable on Charger stuff, like myself included. I mean, just to get me up onto the show. So where can people find your podcast and a lot of your content on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter at DroTalkSD. That's I tweet a lot, especially about the Chargers, obviously. Also talk about some baseball as well, some WWE on occasion. But yeah, I'm mostly a football guy. And then, of course, you can find the show. The show's Twitter, Locked On LAC. Also on every audio platform that you can imagine, your Apple Music, your Spotify, TuneIn. It doesn't matter. We're everywhere. And on video on our YouTube channel, Locked On Chargers.
Well, there you go, folks. I'm definitely going to be locked in on it on all off season and going into 2023. So thank you so much, David. Appreciate your time. Have a great weekend. And hell, if you got the day off the next day, MLK Day, I'd love to have at least an extra Monday. So take care of yourself, recover this well, and let's hope that the Chargers get back into business and hopefully better than before.
Thank you for having me, man. Have a good one. Take care.
Thanks.